Good Monday, Kevin, BJ, Ben Troop will be here with us just a little bit. A lot to get to coming off a wild weekend of football, BJ. Ben, I mean, if it was unexplainable, it probably happened over the weekend in the college and pro ranks. South Carolina blasting Florida. Michigan State losing. You had Alabama and Cincinnati surviving scares against teams that they were heavy favorites against. You had the Jacksonville Jaguars beating the Buffalo Bills, who a lot of people have down as the favorite to go to the Super Bowl. I mean, just why the Atlanta Falcons winning the entire game against the Saints, only to go Falcons on it and lose the lead inside of 2 minutes to go in the game, only to come back and win the game as time expired. What a weekend of football it was.
Yeah, and that Jacksonville Jaguars victory was really something. 9-6. I think the Jaguars had like 215-ish total yards and found a way to beat the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen, the Jaguars, Josh Allen, having a career day, outshining a Josh Allen, the quarterback, obviously, for Buffalo. But yeah, I saw what Christian posted a tweet, I think, on Saturday saying, does anybody want to make the college football playoff? Because not only did you have Michigan State struggle, but as you mentioned, you are a play or two away from LSU beating Alabama, a play or two away from Tulsa beating Cincinnati. It was a really interesting college football weekend, and we should have Ben here with us in a second. But Kev, look, I think all of us looking at the Florida-South Carolina game, given Florida's struggles recently, we thought, yeah, that might be a close game. The line maybe a little large. I think the line was Florida minus 19 or 20, something along those lines. And a Saturday night game, South Carolina trying to get bowl eligible, obviously still a team with a lot of confidence with Shane Beamer there. I thought there was a chance it could be low scoring and, maybe could have been a 14-6 game or something like that, Kevin, late in the third quarter. Florida ultimately winning. But not only did Florida lose, Florida really struggled. I mean, a South Carolina offense that hasn't had many games like what we saw Saturday night had 40 points. They scored 20 in the second quarter alone. Kevin Harris went over 100 yards rushing. You got some big plays through the passing game. And I think one of the big questions in college football as you sit here on a Monday is what is going on at Florida and how hot is that seat for Dan Mullen in Dan Mullen's last 10 Power 5 games. So games against Power 5 competition at Florida, the Gators are 2-8. 2-8. And Florida's been really disappointing this season. They fire Todd Grantham, the defensive coordinator. You fire offensive line coach John Hevesy. You wonder kind of what's next potentially for the Gators. But Kevin, what's your sort of reaction to this? Florida losing by more than 3 touchdowns, getting blown out in a game where they were a 20-point favorite, and it's been disappointment after disappointment in big games, if you want to call them that, for the Gators.
Yeah, and again, we'll talk to Nick Delatorre, Gators territory, coming up in just a little bit. But you're right, Todd Grantham fired, and I think that is one of those things where BJ, Dan Mullen feeling the heat, and what's the first thing you have to do? Well, you have to change coordinators. There's a lot of coaches here in the coming weeks who will be making changes at the coordinator position to try to keep themselves off the hot seat going in. And as you said, I think Florida just down the stretch, you look at some of the play calling, you look at some of the execution, you go, and this just does not look like a team that is interested, does not look like a team that is still acting as though they have stuff to play for. And what a precipitous fall. So much so, BJ, and we'll talk about this later in the show, they may no longer be the second best team in the East right now. I'm not saying it's Kentucky either, but you're starting to fall back into that territory with Tennessee, South Carolina, Mizzou, and the whole kind of meh there in the SEC East, where it's Georgia and everybody else. And as the season plays out, you start looking around going, man, the East just looks really bad. I mean, wasn't that long ago, Kentucky was one of the top 10 teams in the country. And they just lost again. And so you're talking about a team that was out to a tremendous start and has now racked up a couple of losses and starting to look a little more average. So much so, BJ, as you said, at least in the AP poll, they are outside of the top 25 at this point. So I look at the East, and it wasn't that great to start with. I think if you're looking at it from Florida's perspective, it's like, hey, Georgia's out there, and then it's you. I don't know if you're Florida, you could say that anymore. It's still Georgia, but you're now closer to the rest of the pack than you are anywhere else. And I know that's weighing hard on Dan Mullen there in Florida, BJ. And again, you change coordinators. Maybe that buys you some time, but man, I think the level of play, not even just the fact you're losing, but the way you're losing has to speak some volumes as well, BJ. I think it's one of those things, if you're a coach, see what you think. If it's me and I'm looking at it and say, hey, Florida lost by 3, they lost a tough one to Alabama, right? Then maybe you lose a couple close games and you're sitting there going, man, we got 3 losses by a possession each. That might be a little bit more palatable. But you literally got beat by a third-string quarterback, by a first-year coach at South Carolina, by a team that was probably not expected to go anywhere, do anything, and they beat you soundly there on Saturday.
And I want to give credit to South Carolina. I know sometimes when we have results like this, right, it's natural to go, oh, how did the favorite play so poorly? But look, give credit to South Carolina. Jason Brown, the St. Francis transfer, came in, had a great game, made some big throws against the talented defense. Kevin Harris got going, and Shane Beamer, look, this is a win that I think you can use as part of your foundation moving forward. But to your point about Florida, and I understand that maybe individually, Kev, you can look at each of these losses and say, okay, that by itself we can look at and understand. But when they start to add together, the struggles are pretty pronounced. I mean, you lost 40-17 on Saturday night in Columbia. That is getting blown out against Georgia. Now, I understand it's top-ranked Georgia, one of the best defenses we've ever seen. But against Georgia, 34-7. That was not close, and that margin probably could have been more lopsided. You go back a week before that, or 2 weeks with the bye, you were in a close game against LSU, but you gave up 49 points to an offense that has been in transition, that has been up and down. If you want to go back to the larger struggles, go back and look at kind of the 10-game sample size where you've gone 2-8 against P5 competition. You score 13 points against Kentucky. Now, the loss to Alabama, the phrase good loss is sort of hard to use. Florida's a program that's beyond moral victories, but you play Alabama within 2 points. That was a very, very good performance. But outside of that, going back to last season, 55-20, you lose to Oklahoma. Dan Mullen comes out, says some weird things. You play Alabama close in the SEC championship, and then you have the weird finish at the end of the LSU game. But you've played some of these games in back and forth fashion, but the Georgia game was a blowout. The South Carolina game was a blowout. The defensive performance against LSU was really, really poor. And I think all of that is why Todd Grantham's no longer the defensive coordinator. But kind of what's the confidence level of this team? Florida can still manageably get bowl eligible. I think if you go off of, Florida should be favored, I think, against Florida State. You think about Missouri, Florida should be favored there. I believe they have Samford out of the FCS ranks, should be favored there. And if Florida wins out, the Gators will be in a bowl game. You still have a chance to have 7-8 wins for a season, depending upon what you can do. And I was high on Florida in the preseason. Clearly, I was missing the mark there with some of my evaluations, but it's not just that you're losing, but you lost to Georgia by 27 and you lose to South Carolina by 23. And over those 2 games, that span alone, 74-24, you've been outscored by 50 over the last 2 weeks. And you get that Georgia's there, but Kev, isn't that kind of the standard for Florida? I mean, Florida's not trying to be fringe top 25 good. You're not paying Dan Mullen one of the highest salaries in the country to get blown out by Georgia. And they beat them last year. I understand we're looking at a limited stretch, but I think there are some uncertainties around Florida, and that performance on Saturday, a real head scratcher in terms of not even being competitive in the second half.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And making a change there at defensive coordinator. And again, third and Grantham is a thing that becomes kind of a saying because of things that happen. So you go a different route there at defensive coordinator. Obviously, you just have a handful of games left here in 2021, but a change going up there. Again, I would have to say a very disappointing season for Florida fans who, I'm not saying they came into this season thinking they were better than Georgia, but you certainly weren't a team that was going to be sitting here looking at 4, maybe 5 losses by the time it's all said and done, BJ. So a tough go here. Dan Mullen certainly squarely on the hot seat. We'll talk to Nick De La Torre about that from Gators territory. Also, Brooks Austin set to join us, Dogs Daily on SI. He will join us here in hour number 1. We'll talk to Robbie Ross, voice of Paulson Stadium, Georgia Southern. Just a couple of games left to go. They got the new the coaching hire done there as well, and what the now direction of the program is going to be. And at 5:05, Matt Michelle joins us, Orlando Sentinel. Who wants it in the college football playoff? As we'll get a new poll tomorrow from the College Football Playoff Committee. And after some lackluster performances, how does that change things in poll number 2? So a full show today here on 3 and Out. Love to hear from you. Hit us up on Twitter at Pigskin Radio. You can listen to the show live streaming at espncoastal.com. And you can also find us streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Nick De La Torre joins us, Gator Territory, when we come back here on 3 and Out. Good to have you back here on this Monday. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett, Ben Troop will be here with us in just a little bit. We were efforting Nick De La Torre, Gators territory, as again Dan Mullen firing Todd Grantham and offensive line coach John Hevesy from over the weekend after Florida just absolutely gets annihilated 40-17 by South Carolina. And BJ, we mentioned it last segment. Now's the season where you're seeing coordinators now start to go by the wayside after a season of poor productivity, I would say.
Yeah, and sometimes the firing of a coordinator is kind of the step before, the head coach is really on the hot seat. And there are a number of programs around the country where you're going to see moves at the very least heavily considered and some moves made. And, Todd Grantham, I know a lot of fans joke sometimes about the blitzing and giving up long conversions, but Todd Grantham has been one of the, the bigger names around college football in terms of defensive coordinators. This is a guy that has a professional background as well, that has been on championship contending teams as the coordinator. But look, when you give up 70 plus points, whatever it is, I did the math last segment. I can't do math twice, not in back-to-back segments. When you're giving up, 30, 40 points per game in SEC games, that's where you have to draw the line. And I don't know what the expectation is now for Dan Mullen moving forward. Again, it feels like sometimes you fire the coordinator. Maybe that buys you some time, maybe in terms of trying to right some wrongs. But you look at Florida, what's interesting about Dan Mullen to me, Kevin, and kind of what's interesting about trying to project what's going to happen next is Dan Mullen is 33-14 at Florida. I mean, it's not like his entire tenure has been disastrous. I mean, 33-14 is really good. I think the problem this season has been, what have you done against like teams? And by that, I'll mean the SEC. And Florida's now 2-5 in SEC play. 2-5 in SEC play at Florida. And that does not meet the expectation. And I've seen some fans back and forth. Some Gator fans have said, look, we have to make a move. The momentum's not there. Others have said, look, in college football, you're going to have a down season every couple of years. Dan Mullen has had Florida in the national spotlight. Remember, beat Georgia last year, had Alabama within a potential onside kick recovery a year ago and was in the SEC championship game, and have said, look, you're going to have a down year from time to time. And if Florida wins out, they will be in a bowl game. I think Florida, if they win 2 out of 3, they will be in a bowl game. But I think the problem is the standard for Florida, especially when you bring in Dan Mullen, is not making a bowl game. Maybe if you're going through a rebuilding process, maybe if you're talking about, Georgia Tech, what the Yellow Jackets are doing, maybe if you're talking about Florida State with the rebuild there, the initial goal is making a bowl game. When you're paying Dan Mullen, $6-7 million a year, and you go get a coach that had Mississippi State #1 in the country, and you were a part of the staff when you won 2 national titles as the offensive coordinator, you're not doing that to rebuild. And I think that's where the differences lie. Florida can still make a bowl game, but that's not enough for what the Gators are wanting to do currently. And I do think some of the other, there's growing frustration with some, with Georgia Tech. I know the Yellow Jackets have been close, but they've now lost a number of games by 1 score. And at Florida State, you continue to struggle. So programs here in our area are going through some self-evaluations, but I would not expect Todd Grantham to be the only coordinator that gets fired here with programs out of the SEC or ACC.
Well, certainly. And again, you said Florida has to beat Samford this week to get to 5 wins. They would be 5-5 with Missouri and Florida State left to play. So you're trying to win out here. And I know people said, well, that's the talking point was last week, BJ, was, well, if you win out, you still are going to have 8 wins and it's fine. Well, then you got blown out by South Carolina. So I think now minus Todd Grantham, you start to look at the how much do you have to play for thing that's out there, and how much does your roster care about getting to 6 wins, I guess, given that we see kind of growing more and more, hey, if I'm a pro prospect, probably not playing the bowl game. I'm trying to just not hurt myself before I walk into a lucrative NFL contract at some point. So I think that's kind of the new age of college football is when do you get to that point where you start losing a few guys on your roster who might start saying, well, it would be nice to go to the, Bad Boy Mowers Bowl, but I think I'll just hold myself out to get ready for the NFL draft. So, I mean, I'm not saying that there's guys like that are, 85 guys on the roster, but you do start seeing some of that when you get down to the end of the year. So I do think you see Florida in a very unique situation where I think for Dan Mullen, it's one thing to fire your coordinator, your defensive coordinator, and your offensive line coach. I think it's another thing where you need to win these 3 games. Should beat Sanford, yep, who's 3-5. Missouri's kind of in a similar boat, trying to get bowl eligible coming down the stretch. That may not be a gimme. And then who knows? It's Florida State. You don't know what you're going to get from the Seminoles, who are trying to get it back together there under Mike Norvell. So you just don't know, BJ, how it's going to go here with some of these teams coming down the stretch who maybe have had a less than what they would have hoped for season.
And I think even with these programs, if you do have a couple of guys, say I want to get ready for the draft, you're still talking about programs that have depth, that have talent, that want those extra opportunities, that want a chance to go out and compete and play. And Ben, we were just talking about it's not that Florida necessarily lost to South Carolina. I mean, Saturday night games on the road in the SEC are really difficult. Even if you're playing a team that's somewhere around 500, but to lose 40-17. And then in the aftermath, Todd Grantham fired. John Hevesy, offensive line coach, fired. Where is Dan Mullen right now, and what's the pressure like? I believe you're in Gainesville as we speak. What's the pressure like around the program?
I mean, the pressure was already immense going into this game, and you knew that a guy like Dan Mullen could ill afford to have it's not that you have losses, BJ. You talk about embarrassing losses, and sometimes there's a lot more going on in the program than we know. Like everybody knew that Todd Grantham was on borrowed time, and people kind of thought that it was going to be his last year at Florida, no matter how they did. But then when BJ, you talk about if Florida's supposed to be the better rushing attack, and you get embarrassed by a team like South Carolina, who was down to what I think one quarterback, I think that it's easy to kind of go into these press conferences saying something had to happen. But the pressure is on Dan Mullen in a way that's hard to describe, because he makes more money than Kirby Smart. He makes more money than Jimbo Fisher. I think the only two coaches that make more money than him is the coach out there at Stanford and old Nick Saban. I don't think that 4-4 after 8 games is making people feel as though they're getting their money's worth, or 4-5. I'm sorry, after 9 games. So Dan Mullen understands that he's gonna have to go out there and do it. Kevin, something you said. You don't have the same luxury on a bad team that you do in a good team when you talk about going to a bowl game. Yes, I do expect certain guys to say, if Kyer Elam and he decides not to play in the bowl game, he's already solidified. He's the only one. And I know that's unfair, because people think I've done all I can do. Well, I just look at a guy, BJ, Dante Fowler Jr., right? Had an okay career, went to the bowl game, balled out, was 3rd overall, 3rd. So Kevin, yes, we are in different times, but, Christian McCaffrey and Leonard Fournette, well, these are top 4, top 5 picks that didn't play. Jamar Chase missed the whole year, and you see what he's doing. If you're not a top 10 pick, you better take your behind to that bowl game, because you want to get as much tape. And unfortunately, for a team like Florida, they're gonna see who's gonna be dialing it in, saying, okay, the season ain't going the way we want. Let me just dial it in. Look, if one more game is not gonna hurt you. So I do agree, Kevin, that we are in different times when you talk about players deciding to opt out. But your opt-out might be your ticket to never ever get an NFL contract, because they're saying, okay, you opted out. Why? Oh, I thought I had done all I can do. Well, when we turn on the side, they're not going to turn on the good tape. They're turning on LSU, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Kentucky. So when they see, oh, well, yeah, I didn't run on that play. So look, I know how much pressure these players are under. I'm never ever going to blame a player. We are all front runners. Fans of teams, players of teams, admirers of teams. It's easy to play and practice when you're winning. And when you lose them, that ache becomes a pain then. I don't really feel like going out there. But Todd Grantham's gone. O-line coach is gone. Christian Robinson is going to be, linebackers coach going to be calling the plays. Everybody is under scrutiny right now. Dan Mullen say, if I got to fire my friend, because make no mistake about it, Todd Grantham was his friend. Let him go. You should be walking around on eggshells. This next month is either going to go real well if you're a player, or you might hate the fact that you chose to come to the University of Florida, because I'm telling you, listen, Kevin, BJ, y'all married. If the wife ain't happy, nobody's happy. And right now, Dan Mullen ain't happy. So it's going to be a trickle-down effect. Hopefully those guys can find a way to get it together because some of you said, Kevin, you lose to Florida State this year? It's going to be a lot going around. And BJ, I know we think it's going to be a better game than people give it credit for because nobody – remember last year with them double-digit remember last year with LSU? Oh, man, Florida, 24 points. What happened? 18 points this week. What happened? So I ain't trusting none of that stuff no more. Thank you, South Carolina, for bringing me back down to earth because I did think they would win. But when I woke up Sunday morning, I'm like, what the hell happened? 40? Oh, my God. So, hey, man, it's college football. Unpredictable.
We've got more to come here on 3 and Out. We'll come back. Brooks Austin, they've been the most consistent team, Georgia, in all of college football. He'll join us from Dogs Daily on SI when we return here on 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Good to have you back here. Georgia, another convincing win over the weekend. The only thing they didn't do was cover for once there at the end, but a convincing win over Mizzou as they continue to roll on. They have one more SEC game. They've got Tennessee this week, then they go out of conference for the last two ball games. Brooks Austin, Dogs Daily on SI, joins us here on 3 and Out. Brooks, welcome. Another Monday we talked to you, another convincing Georgia win coming off the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pretty efficient game on both sides of the football for Georgia. I thought for the first time all year, someone truly threatened the box. I'm talking like put 8, 9 guys within 9, 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. And Stetson Bennett had 223 yards at halftime. So they did some things this week. They were forced to do some things this week that they hadn't really had to do all year. And they executed. So I thought it was a little bit different of a game from Georgia, but offensively, but defensively, it was the same old from those guys this year.
And Brooks, we saw some impressive proficiency from Stetson Bennett. Also saw JT Daniels get in, throw 11 passes. How do you evaluate those two performances, and what do you make of the quarterback situation moving forward? There will certainly be opportunities, I'd imagine, to get Daniels in.
Yeah, I didn't really see anything from JT that I can really evaluate. I know the one scoring drive he had, well, the touchdown scoring drive he had, I think he went bubble in the flat, 8-yard hitch to John Fitzpatrick, bubble in the flat to Jermaine Burton for a touchdown. So I didn't really learn much. I know a lot of people saw him throw the football for the first time in a long time, and they thought, wow, this is the guy we've been waiting for. But I mean, guys, I didn't see a ball that traveled further than I think 9 yards through the air. So we're going to have to get a little bit further of a sample size before I'm out here really having an evaluation on JT Daniels personally. But I thought, the most important thing for me was he did take a shot to that right side of his body. So that was important for me to see that he got up off the ground and continued to play football. The other thing that was important for me to notice was that, they were rotating the second unit in there. It wasn't like they left the starters in there to, overprotect him. They didn't do any 6, 7-man protections, didn't play like they had a quarterback that was wrapped in bubble wrap. They played like a quarterback that was out there ready to play football. So that was important for me to see based off what we've known over the last couple of weeks with him struggling with injury.
I mean, Brooks, were we experiencing a full-blown role reversal? I mean, it seems like they gave JT Daniels the snaps that, they probably would have gave Stetson if everything was different. Do you think that they've already settled on the fact that Stetson's going to be the guy, but we want to make sure we give JT some snaps if the game, is out of hand already?
I thought it was a game plan of we have a starter that we know we can get out early on Missouri with. And if the game presents itself an opportunity to allow JT Daniels to knock the rust off, then we're going to do that. I know I saw a lot of people on social media say that they think that JT Daniels should have had that whole entire game to knock the rust off. I'm just here to tell you that going into an SEC East game is not the game you need to enter with the idea of, hey, we're going to start a guy that we need to bang the rust out of. Like, that's not good game planning. You go in with the guy that you know and comfortable with and gives you the best opportunity to jump out to a big lead to allow a guy like JT Daniels to get in there. And I think they kind of operate moving forward with the same idea. Look, when your head coach is coming out here saying that one of your quarterbacks has had 3 or 4 weeks where he's really struggled to practice and get reps, when it's coming out of the mouth of a guy who is a practice hound, like Kirby Smart, like it's what he lives, eats, sleeps, and breathes, that's important. Like JT Daniels is going to have to practice a couple weeks, I think, before they just hand him the keys to an offense that he had this offseason.
On 3 and Out, and Brooks again, another effort by the defense, 6 points by Missouri, and I know we've seen it all over college football. You see it with Michigan State, saw it with Cincinnati, Alabama, where some weeks you just don't have it, and the other team, not that you can't win, but you just aren't playing up to snuff. I don't think anybody scored over 14 against Georgia all season long. Are you amazed that even in these games where they come in, I think they were almost a 40-point favorite against a third-string or backup quarterback there for Missouri, that they continue to play, even when your second unit, third unit's getting a lot of reps, they continue to play that lockdown football week in and week out?
Yeah, I think it points to 2 things for me. Culture, one, around the program. They don't just take days off. They don't take games off. don't overlook opponents. But two, you got to really mature and experience football teams. I've said this before. This is a football team that has played a lot of games. These guys that are making impact plays, they've been around for a long time. The Jamari Sawyers, the Zamir Whites, the James Cooks, the Justin Schaefers on the offensive side of the football. And then the defense is loaded with juniors and seniors that have been around this program for a long time. So, but yeah, I think you're pointing to something. I think that really stands out about the dominance of this Georgia football team so far through 9 games is that you look around college football, even this past weekend, like you said, number 2, Alabama struggles is in a 4-quarter fight with LSU. Cincinnati struggles with Tulsa. Ohio State struggles with Nebraska. And the list goes on. And Michigan State loses to Purdue. I mean, you look around the landscape of college football, and there's a lot of teams that aren't showing up week in and week out. We're just showing up not only week in and week out, but dominating every week. So, yeah, it's pretty impressive to watch.
And, Brooks, now you have Tennessee, who got a big win over Kentucky. What type of offensive challenge will they present for the Bulldogs?
Good Lord, them jokers can put it up and put it up quick. But I think Kirby hit on something today. You stop the run in this offense. I don't care what you are. I don't care what your identity as an offense is. I don't care if you're a pro style like Kentucky or if you're a full-on air raid spread like Tennessee. Your offensive identity has to be rooted in early down success, particularly in the run game. And Georgia's defense, no matter how you dress it up, no matter how you try to attack them, is going to limit your ability to run the ball, which means you're going to be in a lot of second and longs, third and mediums, third and longs. It means you got to have a quarterback that can complete and have success on a high rate for 4 quarters in order to consistently move the ball against Georgia. And I don't see Tennessee being able to do that despite all of the success that they have offensively. But here's the deal. They're going to score points. And what I mean score points, they might score 21, 24 points in this football game or have the opportunity to do so because they play so fast. And when they play like that and they play so fast, they're going to get a bunch of opportunities at the football because they're either going to 3 and out really quickly or score really quickly. 3 and out really quickly or score really quickly. It means they get a lot of shots and a lot of cracks at it, which means they're probably going to put up some points on Saturday.
And Brooks, just talk about what Coach Dan Lanning be doing as far as like that front 4. I know a lot of teams, you see a really, really good defense. You think you blitz a lot. They don't really blitz a lot. They just do a lot of games with that front 7. Just talk about the way he's been able to kind of put up nice defensive game plans to be able to do those tackle in twists and really having these quarterbacks being super duper uncomfortable.
Yeah, everything really stems out of what I call stemming, right? And I don't know what you guys called it then when you played, but we called it stem, right? Like walking up pre-snap into a position that you may or may not be in or be attacking post-snap, right? So Kirby used the term simulated pressure. That's all it is. They are pretending that they might be coming, and then they might feint or go out. They do it on a lot of downs. They do it on a lot of early downs too. But a lot of that, believe it or not, Ben, from the people I've talked to, is it's creative freedom that they've given these players because they've been in the system so long. Guys like Nolan Smith and Channing Tindall and Quay Walker and Jordan Davis and Devontae White, they've been studying this scheme for 3 or 4 years now, so much so that when they see something out on the field, they've been given the freedom to pretty much call whatever they want pre-snap, to do whatever it is they want. If they sniff maybe an inside zone's coming at them, maybe they call a specific stunt in a specific scheme to take advantage of that knowledge based off. You keep hearing Kirby talk about these nuggets, right? These bits of information they're giving these players. That's because it's a really smart unit, and they're playing with player freedom, player-led freedom, to where they can call their own stuff. But you have to have the knowledge behind it first.
Brooks Austin joining us here, Dogs Daily on SI, and Brooks to that Tennessee game once again. I mean, you look at Tennessee, and I think everybody would agree this is not the same Tennessee team this week that we saw week 1, 2, 3 of the season. This is a team that's obviously progressed and gotten a whole lot better. What kind of challenge do you think? I know you said a couple weeks ago that maybe Tennessee could push Georgia, but what kind of challenge does Tennessee present to Georgia offensively and defensively that maybe you wouldn't have seen week 1, 2, 3 out of that bunch?
Honestly, I've been pleasantly surprised with how well this program's been ran so far this year. Coming into this year, man, I think they had like 31 guys in the transfer portal. I don't know I can't remember how many of those guys actually left, but I think it was north of mid-20s, high 20s in terms of roster turnover. Guys that have left the program and that he had to replace with either transfers or high school players. And I've been impressed with, the ability to jump out on teams early in football games, which tells me you've got good openers, right? Your offensive coordinator, your offensive staff, and particularly your defensive staff is doing a really good job of scoring on offense quickly early in football games, and on defense, limiting your opportunity to score as well early in football games. So that's a sign of good coaching. That's a sign of a program that's turning things around. I was doing some research this morning. This football team averaged, I think, 21 points per game last year. They're averaging 38.5 per game through 9 games this season. So it's been a really impressive turnaround and a really quick time span. So when I hear people, before I started doing my research, when I heard people talk about Josh Heupel for Coach of the Year, I thought it was asinine. More and more I look at it, I'm like, you know what? Not a bad job that this dude's doing up there in Knoxville right now.
Brooks, since the Clemson game, Georgia's closest game has been 24 points. In kind of a weird way, would it help Georgia, given that the playoff and the SEC title game is on the horizon, to be in a game that's maybe a little closer, to just have those circumstantial opportunities on Saturday?
Potentially, and I get what you're getting at, but if you look at the Kentucky game, that was technically a 4-quarter game. When Kentucky's driving the ball down on a 22-play drive, to end the football game, Georgia's entire defensive starting unit's on the field. So they were out there competing and fighting for 4 quarters. And, the Missouri game didn't turn out like that, but the Auburn game did. That was a 4-quarter fight as well. So I think with the way this football team practices, with the way this football team carries and meets their own standards day in and day out, I don't worry about getting into a fist fight and a 12-round knockout where, you got to actually play for 4 quarters, because I think this team has done that and prepared to do that throughout the way that they carry their business day in and day out.
And Brooks, finally, I know we talk about this every single week. If Stetson Bennett was 6'2" and not 5'9", is this even a quarterback controversy at all?
No, we definitely wouldn't. And honestly, I think if the fan base like this, the problem is the fan base thinks JT Daniels is Trevor Lawrence, and in reality, he's more, in that Jake Fromm, Jacob Eason type of range. Like this isn't a future top 5 pick based off physical intangibles. This is a really smart football player. What he lacks, or what Stetson lacks in height, JT Daniels lacks in athletic ability. So it's trade one for the other. And I think with the way this interior of this offensive line has played right now, particularly in that Florida game, guys, I think if they roll JT Daniels out in that Florida game, he's a sitting duck. He can't move well enough to run away from defensive tackles, so he probably would have got rushed. This interior of this offensive line right now is not protecting well enough for me to say, yeah, go throw the 2020 version of 2021 version of the immobile Peyton Manning into the pocket. Let's see how that operates. I don't know if that's great right now.
Brooks Austin, Dogs Daily on SI, our guest here on 3 and Out. Brooks, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
No doubt, gentlemen. We'll talk to you soon.
Will do. And the Georgia-Tennessee this weekend, I think, BJ, more so than having a back-and-forth 4-quarter game in this one coming up on Saturday, as you mentioned there with Brooks, if Tennessee executes their offense the way they want to, and I'm not saying it's going to translate to points on the board, but if Tennessee executes their offense the way they want to, you're going to have to play 90, 95 snaps on defense, and that, I think, is something that Georgia hasn't had to do by and large the entirety of the football season. Maybe not so much the pressure snaps, but the number of snaps you may have to play defensively. Certainly if Tennessee does what they want to do, is going to be up there in the at very least high 80s into the 90s.
Yeah, that tempo will be a test. And I also think there will be a test for Georgia's secondary, maybe the safeties over the top, where Tennessee looks to not only throw the ball and go fast, but also every now and then, Ben, over the top, try to get those 20, 30-plus yard gains. So we'll talk about this more later in the show, but this is a game that has the potential to be an interesting one in Knoxville.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this Tennessee team, Kevin and BJ, is playing with a lot more confidence. Nothing to lose when you talk about a team like Georgia and everything to gain, but fatigue is going to be a factor, because I don't care how athletic you are. I don't care the scheme. If you are sucking wind That's always gonna favor the team. Kevin, as you mentioned, used to going out there running a lot of plays. I mean, that's what they do right now. Tennessee runs a lot of plays on offense, and another thing they do, they don't let you sub. They keep the same guys on the field all the way down the field. I don't, that may work for a quarter and a half, but if Georgia can find a way to, shut down this running game, as Brooks said, they got a better shot. But very, very impressed at the way Tennessee is playing right now.
Yeah, we've got more to come here on 3 and Out. We'll look ahead to that one coming up a little bit later in the show. But when we come back, the Falcons winning a game on the road against the Saints and doing it in probably the most Falcons way possible. We'll get to that next. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Falcons win in the most Falcons way ever, BJ and Ben. They lead against the Saints virtually the entirety of the game. Multiple scores. Saints come roaring back in the fourth quarter inside 2 minutes, take the lead. And you say, the Falcons going Falcons on it again and losing it in the last 2 minutes after winning the entire game, only to see Matt Ryan complete a 60-yard hookup to your running back / wide receiver / returner / offensive weapon / whatever you want to say. And Younghoe Koo hits the walk-off with no time left for the Falcons to beat the Saints. Most Falcons way ever to get it done. Have to give up a multi-score lead only to kick the game-winning field goal.
Listen, you take the win. I mean, you take the win on the road against your rival. You take that and feel good about it. And Younghoe Koo's been one of the best kickers in the entire league. I mean, 14 of 15 this year, the former star for Georgia Southern, and he's been a star for the Falcons. But Ben, Cordero Patterson, I know you've talked about him a lot. What a season. I mean, this is a guy that's been around the league for a long time, coming out of Tennessee, and he is making plays when it matters. He's doing it as a running back, as a receiver. I mean, this guy has been big time for the Atlanta Falcons.
BJ, Cordell Patterson is a quintessential, pro. When you think about like we get caught up in the big name stars, right? All pros. Look, check the numbers, BJ. BJ, I know you are a numbers dude, and I know he ain't showing it. Cordell Patterson is excellent on special teams, but he does so much offensively. They don't even use him for special teams, but people talk about calling on a player when you need him. People go, Cordell Patterson, man, he's been on a lot of teams. And look at the production of that offense or those special teams on all the teams he's been on. But he saved his best work in that fourth quarter. 64 yards is hard to come by. I mean, that is a lot of real estate. And you talk about, Koo and what he was able to come in and do with the big kick. But BJ, you said it. No, Kevin, they didn't do Atlanta way because Atlanta usually loses. Somebody told them, wait a minute, because every time Atlanta has a double-digit lead, what you hear, 28-3, 28-3, and they showed it. They showed everything. They showed the block punt back when, right after Hurricane Katrina. I'm like, so they're already getting the champagne ready to get this dub. Nope. Matty Ice, he has a new restaurant to where he serve up a lot of fresh ales, beignet style.
We'll come back. We'll take three right around the corner. Also, we'll talk some Georgia Southern football next hour as well. Matt Michelle will join us. We'll talk some college football with him in the final hour of the program. This is 3 and Out on this Monday. Hit us up on Twitter at Pigskin Radio. At Pigskin Radio. You can also catch us streaming live, ESPNCoastal.com, and on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Take 3 coming up next. Hour 2 here on 3 and Out. We'll talk some Georgia Southern football with Robbie Ross, the voice of Paulson Stadium. He'll join us here on the show. Also, we'll look at the Jaguars. And again, BJ, it was a topsy-turvy world of football this weekend. The Jaguars beat the Bills, a Super Bowl favorite in some people's minds, 9-6. The Bills scored 6 on the Jaguars, and the Jaguars get a win. We'll get to that coming up in just a little bit. But first, let's take 3 here on 3 and Out. Mentioned a wild weekend of football, BJ and Ben. Take 1. How ACC is it that Wake Forest, no longer undefeated, because they lose to North Carolina in a non-conference game to a conference member? Thus, they are still undefeated in the ACC by losing to an ACC opponent that's not an ACC opponent this week, and they can still control their own destiny to go to Charlotte and play for the ACC championship. But as we knew, I mean, they were eliminated before, but now they're really eliminated from playoff contention.
Yeah, there's a lot to process here, okay? First and foremost, that was a fun game. I watched a good bit of that North Carolina Wake Forest game, and Sam Hartman, who I've talked about as being a Heisman Trophy candidate, he had 7 touchdowns and like 500 yards, and they lost. But yes, just to confirm for people, Wake Forest is in the ACC. North Carolina is in the ACC. They played each other, obviously fairly local schools in the state of North Carolina. They played each other on Saturday, and it was not a conference game. So this will be like Florida playing Tennessee in a non-conference game, which is kind of hard to understand. Wake Forest is no longer in position, if they ever were, to make the college football playoff. But theoretically, if it gets weird, and it sometimes does in the ACC, Wake Forest could lose an ACC game. They have Clemson coming up. Right now, they are undefeated in the ACC with a loss to North Carolina. To repeat, Wake Forest is undefeated in the ACC with a loss to North Carolina. And I don't know how it will play out with NC State and Clemson and, what the tiebreakers are in the ACC Atlantic. But if we get into a situation where it's close, again, the Wake Forest loss to North Carolina will not count as a loss in the ACC. So in the ACC standings, I'm kind of saying this for everybody and for me. In the ACC standings, Wake Forest is still undefeated because Wake Forest lost to North Carolina in a non-conference game. And Kevin, you summed it up. The best way to explain it is, dude, it's the ACC.
Listen, don't get mad at Wake Forest because they abiding by the rules. Wake Forest went into this game and said, listen, we got a game to give away. Let's give it to the non-conference game. Yeah, but that's North Carolina. Doesn't matter. That's what they decided to come up with. And BJ, look, this Wake Forest team is not benefiting from what Clemson benefits from every year. If this happened to Clemson, if Clemson is undefeated and they lose to North Carolina, Kevin, and that's not an ACC game, they're still undefeated, aren't they? I mean, even if it's play undefeated, like we know they're not undefeated, but here's my BJ, but as currently constituted, they are not. They're still undefeated. And what makes this crazy is who comes up with this stuff? Wake Forest and North Carolina are both in the ACC, yes. But technically, for Saturday, they're not. So what they did their best. Notre Dame? No. Notre Dame is an ACC on paper, but technically they're in their own conference. So Wake Forest still has BJ. I know they got an L, but it doesn't count. That's a non-conference L. Now, it wouldn't have mattered if they was undefeated 2 years in a row. Wake Forest wasn't making no college football playoff because they are the wrong team in a bad conference. If you're the right team in a bad conference, you good. Like the North Carolinas, the Virginia Techs, the Miamis, the Clemsons, maybe even an outlier of a Florida State right now. But yes, BJ, Wake Forest, they should still feel good about their season because who cares about North Carolina? How irrelevant does North Carolina got to be for them to say it ain't even a conference game? What has happened to the ACC? But shout out to them Wake Forest boys still carrying that O, even though they got an L in non-conference.
It is. I mean, it is. We only had to point this out because like the craziest thing ever, and it only happens to the ACC. You have an undefeated team lose to a conference opponent in a non-conference game, and for folks that are going, what? Wait, why is that a non-conference game? And basically you hear about this in other leagues like the SEC due to the rotation. Like Georgia doesn't play Texas A&M very often. They don't play Arkansas very often. They don't play LSU very often. I think the crossover is the way the rotation works. You play Texas A&M and Alabama twice in a decade, basically, or twice every 8 years or something like that. Well, North Carolina, Wake Forest are on opposite sides. They're like, hey, we want to play more to keep the rivalry going, i.e. what a lot of people in the SEC say, like, how can you have a rivalry with Texas A&M when you do not play them but twice in a decade? And so they said, hey, well, we still want to play and keep it fresh and not play each other but twice every 10 years. So we're going to sign a home and home so we can play more often. So that's what they did and made it a non-conference game, but very, very ACC of itself.
All right, Kev, hold up
last
now.
Undefeated. Do what now?
I have a question for both of y'all. Let's say Wake Forest goes on, beats Clemson or NC State or whoever they have left. They win the ACC. They win the ACC championship. Are you wearing a shirt that says Wake Forest undefeated in ACC play in 2021?
If you are a Wake BJ, if I was a Wake Forest fan, you would hate me. I would wear that shirt because BJ, the thing about it is that's what we don't factor in, right? If I'm a Wake Forest fan, they go, wait a minute. We finally at the top of the ACC and they treating us like this? Like, because in a sense, they'll say, well, they don't play nobody. Who did Clemson? So if Wake Forest hasn't played anybody, Clemson did? Well, Clemson was undefeated. Clemson had Trevor Lawrence. Clemson had Deshaun Watson. Clemson had Travis Etienne. I'm just saying, BJ, if you are a Wake Forest fan, regardless of how this season ends, get your shirts ready. Listen, and if you want to know how to be annoying, reach out to Georgia fans, reach out to Tennessee fans. They will teach you how to get on other fan bases nerves. But BJ, yes, Wake Forest has earned it. And who cares about them Tar Heels? They ain't even in the same conference this year. They're still undefeated right now.
Undefeated in the ACC.
Listen.
That's crazy.
UCF know about them undefeated seasons. They know about, But Kevin, if they really do win the ACC, we got to set. I mean, something has to be. This doesn't happen off of a Wake Forest, and we just added because 2022 reality is going to set in, I think.
Yeah. All right. This move ties into take two. If you assume undefeated in conference play, Wake Forest, had to throw that out there, is the ACC's top team. Who is the second best team in that league?
Oh boy. And what's interesting about this is I think people are sleeping on NC State some. NC State has 2 losses. They are 7-2. They lost to Miami by 1 point in a game that had some controversial calls at the end, but they also lost by 14 to Mississippi State in a game where they were not close. And if you just kind of talk it out, is Mississippi State, one of the 7 or 8 best teams in the SEC? I don't know. I mean, the league has a lot of depth. I know Mississippi State was recently in the top 20, lost to Arkansas, but they're not one of the top teams in the SEC. But I think that's a loss you can respect. So because of that, and NC State beat Clemson earlier in the year, albeit had to go into overtime, I think I feel good saying NC State went down to Florida State, won that game fairly comfortably on Saturday. Now, NC State could certainly disappoint at the end of the year, and we have to reevaluate this whole thing. But the only other team that I think you might have to think about, because Pitt is so weird. I mean, Pitt was in the top 20, then Pitt's losing to Western Michigan. They were in a tight game with Duke for a while on Saturday. But Miami has really picked it up the last couple of weeks. They've played some good football the last couple of weeks. And this may sound crazy, but I think on a day where they get a little bit of offensive production, could you still say Clemson? I mean, you can look at Clemson and say this defense is clearly a top 5 defense nationally. So if you have a top 5 defense nationally, you're going to be in the conversation. I mean, Clemson isn't losing many games 28-7. When they lose, it's by a field goal. It's in overtime. So a couple of teams, I guess you can make a case for, but I think we're sleeping on the NC State Wolfpack a little bit. 2 losses, 1 on the road in the SEC, 1 by 1 point. I will go NC State.
Oh, my God. Who is the second best? I mean, BJ just won't leave Clemson alone, right? Oh, Clemson got the defense. Yeah, well, that's all they got. Because DJU, what the hell he do? I don't know either. No, BJ, I think it is Pitt. We got off the Pitt train real fast, didn't we? I mean, when Pitt was balling, BJ, I'm just saying, we was like, hey, man, this Pitt, we always know Pitt brings a good defense. Pitt was doing it with offense, and then they lost. People go, oh, Pitt has 2 losses, right? Okay. But at the end of the day, BJ, we got to respect them the same way we respect them Wade. Pitt is always a good team amongst other better teams in the ACC, and we always talking about everybody else. Give Pitt their shine. Pitt is the second best team, BJ, for the simple fact that I think that their offense is good enough to compete with anybody out there, not named Georgia, not named like the elite teams. But yes, right now, 7-2, I give it up to them Panthers, man. They found a way to get it done. NC State, I mean, they're a feel-good story. They really, really are. I mean, I give NC State a lot of credit, but I mean, BJ, I just think that we just jumped off the Pitt train. It's like we was waiting on them to lose, so you didn't have to talk about them. Well, dude, they only got 2 losses. And if Wake Forest actually played North Carolina when it mattered, they would have a loss. So Wake Forest still undefeated. Pitt has 2 losses. But in my mind, yes, Pitt is the second best team in ACC right now.
That's a tough question. Nobody wants that mantle of second best. I would go NC State, but as you said, BJ also had a bad loss in Stark Vegas earlier in the season. That was just kind of unexplainable at the time. Take 3. Who is, if we know Georgia's number 1, who is the second best team in the SEC East?
Wow. Yeah. And you look at the SEC East, so much has happened here, right? And the transitive property is not going to work. You're talking about Florida losing by 23 to South Carolina. You think about Kentucky was in the top 10 not that long ago. Now they're not in the top 25. Just lost to Tennessee. Tennessee the last few weeks has been really good, even in losing efforts in recent weeks. You know, had Alabama in a close game in the fourth quarter. I don't think you're talking about Vanderbilt. I don't think you're talking about Missouri. And this may sound really strange given what happened on Saturday, but I think if you're looking at the totality of the season, I still might say Florida, and I don't feel good about it. But if you're think about it like this, if your gut reaction to that question is, oh, it's Tennessee, look at what Tennessee's doing. They're in position to play Georgia, maybe close on Saturday. Florida beat Tennessee 38-14. And I know you're talking about an 8, 9, 10, wherever we are, game sample size here, and that's just one game. I agree. But Florida didn't just kind of get by Tennessee with a field goal. Florida beat Tennessee 38-14. And Florida's been a major disappointment as of late. But if Florida's playing, I don't know, though, because the way Tennessee, if Florida plays Tennessee tomorrow, I guess my gut would lean Tennessee. But how do I compare that with the reality of Florida beating Tennessee by 24 points? I'm talking this out as we go. And then you have Kentucky out there who seemingly every time Kentucky loses, they lose by 3 or 4 points. And Kentucky beat Florida. I don't know. Now that I've gone back and forth on it, I wanted to say Tennessee. Then I wanted to say Florida. Then I thought about Kentucky. And I think the way they're playing right now, I guess I'll come back to Tennessee.
I'm looking at the SEC East standings, BJ. And, numbers got to mean something. Georgia's 9-0. Florida's 4-5. South Carolina's 5-4. Tennessee is 5-4, and Kentucky is 6-3. Look, it is lonely at the top with Georgia. It is a dumpster fire or whatever. However you say. I hope I said that right for number 2, 3, and 4. But for BJ, I'm gonna say Kentucky. You know why? And I don't got Kentucky did beat Florida, right? When that's not something they used to do. Kentucky, Tennessee cannot beat Florida at this point. It just doesn't happen. And Kentucky is doing the BJ throwing the football.
But Tennessee just beat Kentucky, obviously.
Yes, and guess what? The Kentucky still has a better record. We thought that if Kentucky could find a way to play good defense, run the football, they had a chance to be a good team. Well, BJ, right now their record is saying 6-3. Second best in the East. You talk about a Florida team that's underachieved. A Tennessee team, BJ, that yes, offense has played better. They played better as of late. Give Coach Stoops a lot of credit. Them dudes, they got the second best record. If Florida had the second best record right now, wouldn't nobody have a word to say they'll be number 2? Nope. Florida's number 5 right now. So you're talking about Mizzou and Vanderbilt and all that kind of good stuff. Florida's scratching and clawing to get the 6 wins. I told you that 6 wins, Kevin, it ain't like it used to be. That is rough. But you know what? Got 6? That will be Kentucky. They are already bowl eligible. And Florida going to need 2 more wins to get bowl eligible. Give me them boys from Lexington.
Yeah, that's tough. It is a huge gap from Georgia to everybody else. I guess I'll say Tennessee, but BJ, if they get trounced by Georgia, could it be South Carolina? I don't think anybody wants that mantle of number 2 there in the SEC East. That's take 3. We do it each and every day here. This time we'll come back. We're talking some Georgia Southern football with Robbie Ross, voice of the Paulson Stadium, when we return here on 3 and Out. Good to have you here, 3 and Out on this Monday. Kevin, BJ, and Ben. Georgia Southern, tough loss to Coastal Carolina over the weekend. They finish out a 3-game stretch here, coming down the road of the season, looking ahead to the Clay Helton era beginning, as he is officially on staff, but will not obviously coach until this season is over. And we are, Scott Word, BJ, and Ben, expected to have Clay Helton on the show on Wednesday. So Georgia Southern head football coach Clay Helton set to join us on Wednesday here on the show. But joining us here on the program, you can hear him inside Paulson Stadium. The voice of Paulson Stadium, Robbie Ross, joins us here on 3 and Out. Robbie, welcome to the show. How are you?
Well, I guess I get to roll out the blue carpet for Clay on Wednesday. Then is that it? You're warming it up for me?
Yes, you are the opening act for Clay Helton to come on the show on Wednesday. But we talked to you a lot about Georgia Southern, the atmosphere there at Paulson Stadium, certainly under Chad Lunsford. It had been going a certain direction. You make the change, and I think initially everybody was kind of, when you heard Clay Helton, you're like, you mean the guy that got fired from his last job? And then you dig a little deeper, and you're like, Clay Helton actually did pretty well at Southern Cal, maybe not up to the standard that some of these Southern Cal folks wanted, but did go to a Rose Bowl, has had a good coaching resume, and is now coming to Statesboro to take over this program.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the names of coaches that he coached under: Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, Ed Orgeron. The list goes on and on. Even when he was at Memphis, the names of players he coached: D'Angelo Williams at running back at Memphis was one of them. And like you said, he won a Rose Bowl and played for a number of Pac-12 championships, winning 10 games a couple of years, and like you said, just didn't match up to the standards of what Southern Cal thinks, and that's in quotation marks, thinks they're supposed to be, that so many programs across the country these days feel like they have this, what they're supposed to be, and maybe pull the trigger on coaches early. But what worked out for Georgia Southern and athletic director Jared Benko is, you got a big name, you got someone that has the ability and the track record to bring in top name recruits and recruiting classes. And that is what Georgia Southern needs, and what I think majority of folks are excited about. Of course, you're always going to have the triple option people in Statesboro that are going to ho-hum anybody that doesn't run the triple option. But I said when this whole thing started that Georgia Southern was at a crossroads. They have to go down the triple option road, or they have to blow it all up and start over. And I think they made the right choice in Clay Helton to do that.
And Robbie, the press conference last week, a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. Clay Helton seemed thrilled to be in Statesboro, talked about, hey, I would have walked here from California. What were your impressions from the press conference and some of the first comments we heard there from Coach Helton?
Yeah, I mean, he won the press conference. There's no doubt about it. And got everybody excited and said all the right things. And you expect him to do that. And saying that he, he probably didn't expect to be employed 6 weeks after losing his job at Southern Cal. I certainly didn't expect for Jared Benko to hire somebody with, at that point, 4 games left in the regular season, or 4 games left in the season for Georgia Southern. And you're right. He was excited. He's excited about being in Statesboro. He was there on Saturday, sitting down, doing all the media on last week. And then, of course, this week when he'll be on the show with you guys on Wednesday. Introduced at the first quarter break on the field during the game. Met with some recruits on the field pregame, but then kind of kept his distance. Did not go on the sideline during the game. Was upstairs in the athletic director's box and just kind of observing, but was very present in Statesboro on Saturday, which I think that made a lot of people happy too.
Robbie, a new face, new energy, big name, but patience. It's not something anybody has that's going to be afforded in college football. Definitely not in the place that Georgia Southern is probably going to get away from the triple. How soon is this new offense going to have to take shape to kind of try to start winning over these skeptics who think that the triple is what belongs to Statesboro?
Well, the good news, Ben, and you guys know, the good news is that in this era of college football, the portal has become extremely important and extremely popular. And I think that Coach Helton is going to, of course, this is just my opinion, attack the portal. And you can rebuild offenses and rebuild defenses schematically and personnel-wise a lot faster now than you could even 2 or 3 years ago because of the portal. And I think that is the avenue that he will go. But also, like he said in the press conference, I mean, you look at the athletes within 200 miles or even 100 miles in a radius of Statesboro, the athletes that we have here in South Georgia, you could build a team of all-stars in the 100-mile radius of Statesboro with all the talent we have in the high school levels here as well. So between high school players and hitting that portal, changing the offense, I don't think is going to be as big of a deal as it would have been if Coach Lunsford was trying to do so back when he started and the interim tag was taken off his name.
Robbie Ross joining us here, voice of Paulson Stadium. And Robbie, obviously the ever-changing face of college football, this Sun Belt team in the last 2 weeks, or Sun Belt Conference, in the last 2 weeks looks a whole lot different than it did at the beginning of October, with additions coming in, and you could tell the league really trying to make a move to push themselves up there to say, hey, we are the top G5 conference out there. Is this kind of doubling down on that if you're Georgia Southern, saying, look, not only do we need to be competitive, with the coaches you have in this league, we need to go out and make a splash with the coaching hire. You've got Terry Bowden in there and a number of other coaches who have, big-time profiles around college football. Georgia Southern needing to go out there and get one of those.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Terry Bowden, Butch Jones at Arkansas State, now Coach Helton, Billy Napier is a name you always hear with every SEC job that comes open. And I agree with the group, the number one group of five conference, I think, is now the Sun Belt. And I'll take it a step further and say the number one toughest division in group of five is now the Sun Belt East, with James Madison, Old Dominion, Marshall, Georgia Southern, Coastal, Georgia State, and Appalachian. There's not a tougher division in group of five that I can think of, and really in all of college football, except maybe outside of the SEC East and West.
Robbie, obviously excitement around Coach Helton, but you look at the schedule, you still have Texas State this weekend, at App State at the end of the year, and then BYU coming to Statesboro on the 20th. You're talking about a team that I believe is in the top 15 in BYU. What type of stage will that be for this program and this team?
Well, as of Saturday, Coastal Carolina was the highest ranked team to ever come in Paulson Stadium. That will change in a couple of weeks as long as BYU continues to win. They will then take over the title as the highest ranked team to ever come in Paulson Stadium. And as of this morning, only 500 tickets remained for that game. So you're looking at a sellout on that last November 20th game of the year. Georgia Southern not bowl eligible now after dropping their loss to Coastal Carolina. So just kind of playing out the string for pride on the road at Texas State. And you got BYU, and then, of course, that Thanksgiving weekend matchup with Appalachian where you kind of throw the records out the window, but just kind of playing for pride. And really, these kids are playing for an audition almost, really, for Coach Helton, because he's going to be watching, he's going to be breaking down film, and he's going to see and be looking to see who he wants on his squad next year. But that BYU game is going to be a sellout, and it's going to be a lot of people, and a lot of people from Utah, what I hear.
And Robbie, I know that those players are definitely going in there trying to put their best foot forward, best tape out there, because Coach Helton is watching. But do you see it being any holdovers from the Coach Lunsford coaching staff? I know some of these guys are really, really good at what they do, really, really love coaching at Georgia Southern. Which one of these guys you think could be potentially a holdover on this new Coach Helton coaching staff?
I think you got to look at Coach Victor Raw first and foremost on the defensive line. Just the way that college football works, I think the coordinators probably will not be back. Coach Helton will probably, as you know, bring his own coordinators in. But position-wise, I think that Victor Cabral, who has been on a number of staffs at Georgia Southern and has really got the defensive line playing well, regardless of how their record has been this year. And I think he's one that will be a holdover. You look at even Coach Whitley, that is the interim coach, as the cornerbacks coach. He played for Irk Russell, a Hall of Famer. It'd be hard to not have someone there to link the tradition of old to new. But, Coach Helton, I'm sure, has his ideas of how he wants to form his staff himself. And it'll be interesting to see if there are any holdovers.
Yeah, again, he's got to fill out that coaching staff. Robbie Ross, the voice of Paulson Stadium, our guest here on 3 and Out. Robbie, always a pleasure, man. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
Appreciate it. Robbie Ross joining us here on 3 and Out. We'll come back. We will talk some NFL football. Strange things happening in Jacksonville One of them a W, but other strange things happening as well. We'll get to that next here on 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Raise your hand, fellas, if you had the Buffalo Bills in the Jaguars win column preseason. Yeah, me neither. 9-6, BJ. How very Jaguars of them, and they won a game against what a lot of people have been saying is a Super Bowl favorite, barely had 200 yards of offense, and won an ugly game against the Buffalo Bills that nobody saw them winning.
And remember, the year the Jags made the Super Bowl with Blake Bortles and that great defense, they beat the Bills in an early round playoff game that was something like this. It was like 17 total points or something. But look, first and foremost, credit to the Jaguars. It has been a disappointing start to the season, and you found a way to beat the Buffalo Bills. I mean, Kevin, to your point, even the most optimistic fans probably were looking at the schedule going, yeah, maybe no, we're going to get blown out in this game. And you found a way to win in a game where you scored 9. You scored 9 points, and you beat the Buffalo Bills. So the defense was playing tremendous football. Josh Allen, the Jaguars' Josh Allen, was unstoppable. Had a sack, had a couple of TFLs, had a fumble recovery, had a pick. Ben playing defensive end. So shout out to Josh Allen. Taven Bryan had 2 sacks. You were able to control the game from the line of scrimmage. And that was a great game, a great performance from Jacksonville's defense. Trevor Lawrence got hurt. You didn't have James Robinson. And you found a way with defense and field goals. I think Matthew Wright, the kicker for the Jaguars, had I want to say one of his field goals was like 55 yards. So credit is due for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that's a win you will absolutely take. That's one that turns heads around the NFL. But Ben, the Jaguars won a game with 218 total yards. They averaged 4.6 yards per pass and 2.9 yards per rush. How in the world does this happen?
Josh Allen. And BJ, this is the thing, right? Josh Allen on both sides. Here come the freaky stuff, because people will go, what makes Josh Allen and Josh Allen similar? Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills was born in 96. Josh Allen of the Jaguars was born in 97. Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills went 7th overall in 2018. Josh Allen of the Jaguars went number 7 in 2019. So when you hear the term with the real Josh Allen, please stand up. Well, he stood up on Saturday. Josh Allen of the Bills has 1 career receiving touchdown. Josh Allen of the Jags has 1 career pick. Josh Allen the thing about Josh Allen of the Jags, BJ, people kept saying, is he worthy of the 7th pick? Well, the crazy thing you heard this weekend was, Josh Allen drops back. Josh Allen sacked by Josh Allen. I think that happened 3 times. Josh Allen with the pick on Josh Allen. Josh Allen with the fumble recovery on Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen of the Jags had to send I think both guys had to send their jerseys to Canton, because you never had 2 players going out there doing what they're doing. And BJ, all I'm saying is it is hard to keep an NFL. No. It is hard to keep an offense out of the end zone, period. They didn't get in the end zone. Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, because the other Josh Allen said, listen, man, I got y'all. Hey, Josh, what? A great name, but you on the wrong squad. Shout out to them Jags, BJ. But this was the story of the game. Trevor Lawrence hurts his ankle, goes to the locker room, comes back, begs to go back in, comes back in. Hey, they learn how, BJ, you always say, listen, the key to winning is losing. And the Jags have done a lot of that, but they didn't do it on Saturday. And I just think that we don't give pros enough credit for just, really just honing in on this game. I can't worry about what hasn't happened before. All I got is right now. So shout out to Josh Allen of the Jags for leading that effort, BJ. I mean, because look, both of those offenses had to stink it up for both teams to even have 9-6. But shout out to the kickers who are football players too. But shout out to the Josh Allen 7th overall pick in 2019, born in 97. Of them Jags find a way to get it done. Because that's BJ. I thought, because I had to look into it, I'm like, oh Lord, 1 on 24, 1 on 25. He said, I ain't got time. I did know one guy is a smidgen under 6'5". The other guy is actually 6'5". You take your pick which one you want that to be.
It's the first, like I said, Ben, it's the first time that Josh Allen has tackled Josh Allen.
Josh Allen is beating the hell out of Josh Allen.
I think it was the first time in NFL history a player made a play on a player with the same name in the National Football League. So that's a little bit of history there. But BJ, again, I think everybody stunned And maybe if you gave him the true term, Urban Meyer might even be like, I don't know what happened. 9. I mean, you beat the Buffalo Bills. I mean, one of the more improbable victories you're going to get over the course of the regular season. The Jags now have 2 wins here in Urban Meyer's first campaign, and maybe they pick up a couple of more. But how do you explain that if you're a team that was down near the bottom and it's like one of the best teams? It makes no sense.
No, but I think to Ben's point, you have games where players step up and dominate. And when it happens or when we try to predict it, we think about quarterbacks, right? Oh, this quarterback's going to have a fantasy football day where you throw for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, or a running back goes off. Very rarely, outside of guys like Aaron Donald, do we mention a defensive player going off? And Josh Allen did that. Again, how many times in NFL history has a defensive end had a fumble recovery and a pick in the same game? I mean, you don't see that a lot. And we were at the draft, Ben, when the Jags took Josh Allen in the top 10. And to me, this guy's one of the best players in SEC history. Defensively, what he did, and I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but the tackles for loss, the sacks, the forced fumbles, the passes defended, one of the more versatile, dynamic, and impactful defenders in the history of the SEC coming out of Kentucky, and came in right away on that great defensive line and made a huge impact. And then maybe it took some time for him to, when you were talking about a revamped defensive line, kind of emerge. Remember, Jacksonville's now playing a 3-4 defensive scheme, which is a little bit different, but he just proved that he is still one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. He's a star. Josh Allen for the Jaguars is a star, and we saw that on Sunday against one of the best teams in the NFL. And I think this is the kind of win that can help a franchise kind of find some confidence. I know, Ben, you've said, hey, sometimes we think the key to, rebuilding is just getting top draft picks. Well, not really, because a lot of the times it's the same teams picking in the top 5. If it was as simple as have 5 or 6 top 5 draft picks and you win, well, the Browns wouldn't be the Browns, the Jags wouldn't be the Jags, the Lions wouldn't be the Lions. You have to find ways to win. And I think for Jacksonville to win a game where their offense was terrible, to win a game where you didn't get in the end zone, that's something you can build off of. And happy for Josh Allen, because he's been a star. And sometimes when you're playing in Jacksonville, you get overlooked. You don't get appreciated. Yeah, I mean, heck, not that long ago, this team had lost 20 games in a row. So they found a way, they fought, they scrapped, beat one of the best teams in the NFL, and I think there's momentum to be gained from that. And glad to see Josh Allen getting talked about nationally, the Jags, Josh Allen. But when you were mentioning the Josh Allen on Josh Allen, interception, tackle, sack, and forced fumble, Kevin, I'm trying to think, didn't you have a few interactions between the Braves and Dodgers where you had Will Smith pitching to Will Smith?
That is true. That is true. So it does happen, but just not very often. Not very often. I don't know how many Matt Ryans we've seen on the other side of the ball against the Atlanta Falcons at the end of the day. No Julio Joneses playing defensive back. For somebody.
There are certain names you don't want. Like, you don't want your name to be Michael Jordan, and you showing up to a conference, they're like, you Michael Jordan? Yeah. Oh, my God, it's him. No, there are certain names you don't want. But this is the thing. Josh Allen of the Bills hated the fact that his name was Josh Allen, because what happens is, a quarterback can say, hey, man, I'm big, I'm fast, I'm strong, I'm athletic. What if I play defensive end? He's standing right there, and he has 4-1 on his chest. No, BJ, I give credit where credit is due. It's not that you win, it's how you do it when it comes to the Jags. 9-6, that's a slugfest, man. That's saying, look, we ain't gonna give an inch, but they did get it done. Shout out to Josh Allen, BJ, that we saw in Kentucky, and not the smidget under 6'5", who's already signed his second deal. But shout out to both Josh Allen for finding a way to make it very, very entertaining on Sunday.
Yeah, we've got more to come here on 3 and Out on this Monday. We'll hear from Matt Murschel, Orlando Sentinel, coming up in the final hour, National College Football writer, as we get ready for playoff poll number 2 coming up tomorrow night. So looking forward to that. We'll hear from Matt coming up at the top of the final hour of the program. This is 3 and Out all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Good to have you back here on 3 and Out. We're here from Matt Murschel. Coming up in about 10 minutes, we'll talk some National College football with him as we'll get playoff poll number 2 coming up on Tuesday, and we'll get a better read on how you evaluate Cincinnati and Alabama after their performances over the weekend. But Braves, obviously, still a week out celebrating the World Series championship. BJ Ben, maybe some good news. Alex Anthopoulos talking about Freddie Freeman saying, look, I can't talk about him because he's a free agent. But I will say what I've said in the past. We love him. He's great. We want him to stay. He wants to stay. How the process plays out and goes from there, I can't really get into specifics. But very similar to what I've said in the past, our goal is to sign him and keep him a Brave, in quotes. So I think that's the one thing that I think should make Braves fans feel good is both sides want to make this thing work. Both sides are committed to making it work. And the Braves have already come out and said, look, we have more money to spend. And that coming on the heels of reports, BJ and Ben, that we're seeing around Major League Baseball, where coming off the pandemic, where Major League Baseball teams scaled back, you come back into 2021. You saw good attendance there at the ball games. A lot of teams are kind of, to use a quote I saw in a story, awash with some cash maybe they weren't expecting. Expect a lot of teams to be able to go out there and make good offers in free agency. Braves should be more than able to go out and make an acceptable offer to Freddie Freeman to keep him in Atlanta.
Yeah, and I think we all feel good about Freddie coming back to Atlanta, and that's not just kind of random wishing either. I mean, everybody we've talked to has said, hey, there's a great chance, an overwhelming chance that this happens. I think what Buster Olney said on ESPN National Radio, he thought it was a 99.95% chance that
Yeah.
Freddie comes back. But Ben, you've been through the free agency process. I mean, is there a kind of a timeline where you start to get a little worried? And I'm not saying that now by any stretch of the imagination, but if we're a couple of weeks down the line, a month, 2 months, I mean, is there a point in time where you start to feel a little anxiety because it hasn't happened yet? Or is this part of the game with free agency? It takes time, and it just may take a couple of weeks for both sides to come to an agreement.
It's going to take time with Freddie Freeman, BJ, because when they had a chance to sign him before the season ended, before you had World Series champ next to his name, and and everything he did in the postseason, and I give Freddie Freeman this. Freddie Freeman is not like any superstar I've ever seen. He don't make waves. He don't make it about him. He doesn't. He asks a question because he's the face of the franchise. But Kevin, just like I know, when people say, "Oh man, Freddie don't need that much money," no, you don't. You don't speak for him. This is it. This will be the biggest contract he signs right now. I don't know for how many years, but I understand that you don't want to salvage the future, Kevin, for the present. But this is your present and your future when you have the best player at his position in baseball. I don't know what that number is going to be, but it is higher than it was before the season ended.
Without a doubt, and I think here's the other thing that Braves fans should feel good about. If you don't sign Freddie Freeman, and this is blasphemous to say at this point, but if you don't sign Freddie Freeman, what's your backup plan? You traded away maybe your best prospect first baseman there at the trade deadline. You don't really have one that's a big prospect coming up as a first baseman. If you don't re-sign Freddie Freeman, you're going to have to go out and find somebody to play first base. So I think that weighs big in Atlanta's favor. That has been said. This is the Freddie Freeman, you're a lifer Brave contract. We are going to make sure you are locked up till you probably don't want to play anymore, and we'll make that happen. I don't know if you get into like a 10-year Albert Pujols type thing, but I certainly think this will be a deal that pushes you very close to 40 years old. And by that point, you could probably do a 1-year deal for as long as Freddie wants to play. But BJ, I think this is the Freddie, you're a Brave for life contract that he's going to get here this offseason.
And I don't know. I mean, we've all read projections on social media, but are you looking at something, Kevin, theoretically like 6 years, 170, 180? I mean, what is that in the ballpark of what we're looking at?
I mean, possibly so. I think obviously with some incentives for MVPs and things that may come into play. So, I mean, I think he's certainly got more good years ahead of him. I don't think this is an Albert Pujols situation where you look at it and say, he's probably got I think Freddie's got at least 3 or 4 kind of peak years in him of this kind of production that we've seen before you maybe see the average and some of those things start to come down. But yeah, I think you're looking at least 6 years getting pushed closer to that 40-year-old mark, and he's a Brave for life. Final hour next. Good to have you back here. Hour number 3 of 3 and Out. We'll look at Alabama and Cincinnati after Saturday as we get ready for week number 2 of the college football playoff. Georgia, Tennessee coming up this weekend. Final SEC game for Georgia here in 2021 ahead of the SEC championship game, of course. And joining us here to talk about the wild and wacky season of college football from the Orlando Sentinel, national college football writer Matt Murschel joins us here on 3 and Out. Matt, welcome. How are you?
Pretty good. How you doing today?
Hey, we're doing fantastic, and just a wild season of college football where we kind of made the joke of who wants to stay in the playoff picture given some of the performances we've seen. And what do you kind of attribute to the fact that out of all the teams in college football, Georgia's played the most consistent, and then you can jump right down to number 2 and say nobody else has really looked all that dominating in their performances here in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, you look at what Georgia's done on the defensive side of the football, and it's one of the most dominant performances we've seen in quite some time. And I think that's really the reason why they are at number 1. I mean, you think about this, that the Bulldogs, haven't really played that well on offense at times. Stetson Bennett, the backup quarterback, he's looked good in that role. They've had some other guys down and injured, but it's in the defense really that stepped up and has played at that elite level. And that's what separated them from everyone else in the playoff rankings. And I think a lot of that just shows a lot of the parity going on in college football right now.
Matt, in your mind right now, who's the second best team in the country after Georgia?
I'm going to go with Alabama. I think Alabama still remains the second best team, despite the fact that they've got some issues as well. You look at how they played against LSU, not a perfect game by any stretch. When's the last time we've seen an Alabama team only rush for 6 yards? But they still seem a more complete. You look at Oregon, I'm just not sold on Oregon right now. And Ohio State, as good as they've looked, they lost to Oregon, obviously, early in the season in the head-to-head. And Cincinnati, I would make the argument you could put Cincinnati in that 2 or 3 spot. They've played well, although they're going to continue to have an image problem because the committee is going to look at them and look at their strength of schedule and not compare them to the teams above them.
And man, even sticking with Cincinnati, you talk about their strength of schedule now and not having that national appeal. But, Clemson, even though they're not going to be in the college football playoff this year, I mean, the same thing that Wake Forest isn't benefiting from this year in the ACC, Clemson benefited from, 4 or 5 years in a row.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the ACC, and it's really, it's taking that step back, which is kind of unusual. I mean, everyone thought Clemson was going to be the team to beat. We thought going in that they were, going to be up there with the Alabamas, but they just haven't happened this year. It just goes to show you what happens when you have issues on the offensive line. Your offense is humming along. Your quarterback situation is not as sharp as it could have been. And then you look at Wake Forest. Wake Forest becomes this kind of dominant team that no one, I don't think, was expecting, and then they get tripped up by North Carolina. So, the ACC now, in my mind, look at it, really doesn't have a shot at getting into the playoffs this year. So, it goes to show a little bit of that parity in the ACC right now.
Football season just as a whole coming down the stretch. I mean, you talk about Heisman Trophy candidates, and a lot of the guys that we were talking about preseason either aren't playing quarterback, they've been moved to the bench, or are just not having a great season. What do you kind of attribute some of that to, that so many guys have not kind of hit those preseason expectations?
Yeah, some of that could just be the fact that, we've seen guys struggle with injuries. We've seen guys who, their teams maybe aren't necessarily as good as we thought they might be. And you're right, the Heisman race is as wide open as I could ever remember it. I mean, I think Bryce Young, the Alabama quarterback, is probably the top quarterback. But, Kenneth Walker struggled last week. C.J. Stroud has been okay, but it's gotten better. Matt Corral has been there as well, and Kenny Pickett. But this might be one of those years maybe that we're looking at someone kind of outside an offensive frame. Maybe it's a year for the defense. We haven't had a defensive player win it. It'd be nice, at least not in a long time. It'd be nice to have someone else step up. Jordan Davis from Georgia. Maybe someone else, could step up and make that push, because as of right now, there really isn't a Heisman favorite.
Matt, it's interesting. It's been such a wild season in college football, but there's a chance we could have a playoff that looks something like Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and Oklahoma. I mean, for all the uncertainty and for all the kind of nobody wants to be number 2, 3, or 4, at the end of the day, could we still have the same group of teams basically playing for it all?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the interesting fact. That's why people are kind of pushing for this idea of expanding the playoff, and that's something that, when they were commissioners put forth their proposal for the 12-team playoff expansion, that everyone was so on board, and why now that they're starting to drag their heels, that fans are getting a little concerned because they want to see different teams. They want to see not just at the top four. They'd love to see some more opportunities for some of these teams to play. Imagine if we had a 12-team playoff right now. We'd be talking about, you'd be seeing teams like Michigan and you would definitely have Notre Dame in there, Oklahoma State maybe, or Baylor. You'd see some teams in there that you normally wouldn't see, and they maybe have an opportunity to upset someone in a first round or second round game and get themselves in there. So I think playoff obviously expansion is going to happen. It's just whether or not it's going to happen before the current contract ends in 2025, or whether it's going to have to be something we see once the new deal is made up.
Man, if you're not a usual suspect like a Cincinnati, and obviously all you can do is play the schedule you have, what does it take to them to get that national appeal? Because we mentioned if Alabama, who lost to Texas A&M, it's almost like they didn't lose to Texas A&M because they're a usual suspect. They wanted the blue bloods or part of the college football fabric. What would it take for a Cincinnati or a UCF or an outlier to kind of be one of the last teams standing? What can they do that's outside of their control at this point?
Well, what they could do is what they're going to do, which is move to a bigger conference. I mean, you think about it. I mean, those two schools have obviously been the teams that have on the outside looking in. And now you're seeing why it's important for them to get into the Big 12. They feel like they want to have their shot to get in there. They feel like your teams are good enough. If you're a team like that and you're not in a power conference, you almost have to play. One, your conference has to play almost at elite level, like the American did a couple of years ago. If the American had 3 or 4 teams ranked right now, it would make the case easier for Cincinnati. It's not the case right now. And then you look at, if you can go undefeated and you can have a non-conference schedule that features several Power 5 schools that are doing well, I think that would help out as well. But I think right now what's hurt Cincinnati is just the American isn't that strong this year. And, they don't really have anyone else that they can go up against. SMU was ranked, but they lost. And now you're looking at the fact that there's no one else in the rankings, in the playoff rankings at least. Houston is in the AP rankings, but that doesn't matter. But if they can get in the playoff rankings, that's going to help them out. But at this point, there isn't much else really Cincinnati can do. They can hope Notre Dame continues to win out and does well, and you hope that maybe someone above you wins and kind of maybe knocks someone down, because that's all you could do at this point with the way the system is set up.
And again, Matt, I guess it comes down to what have we learned, I guess, about this playoff committee over the years that it's been formed, where I think a lot of people have said, boy, Alabama has not looked like Alabama for large stretches of this year, yet they were number 2 in the very first playoff ranking. What have we learned about this playoff committee and just over the years, how we expect them to do things?
Well, I think you're going to look at the fact that as much as they say they don't put a bias on when they walk into the door, there are going to be some teams that have that kind of a feeling. You look at the fact that what Alabama's done. You look what Georgia's done. You look what the Big Ten has done this year. They still find a way to put them in there. I think Cincinnati is a great example of that. You can't tell me that an 8-0 Cincinnati couldn't have been closer than 6th in their rankings. But who have they played? I mean, they've played Notre Dame. They beat Notre Dame at home. They played Indiana. They beat an Indiana team. So, I think that says a lot about what the selection committee is. And it's not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination. And I think fans just have to kind of understand that it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be like it was with a computer poll. But even with the computer polls, we still had these kind of issues where people were upset about it. So I just don't know if there's an actual perfect system right now, which is why we're talking about expansion, because they feel at least that gives some other teams an opportunity to make their case.
Matt, switching gears to talk about the Florida Gators. Man, expectations were modest to a certain extent this preseason, but you just got blown out by South Carolina. You have a losing record. How do you evaluate what's going on with the Gators right now?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest mysteries we've had this season. You look at how Florida has underperformed this year. Obviously they just recently made a change, with their coaching staff. They got rid of their defensive coordinator, Todd Grantham, and their offensive line coach, and John Hevesy. But those are things I thought they should have made moves before the season started. The defense was always been an issue over the last couple of years. Now you wonder if Dan Mullen's job is safe. You wonder if he's going to stick around, or does Florida make a move. I mean, they're going to owe him a lot of money if they do make a move. And, so at some point, the disappointment for the fan base is obviously legitimate. It's okay to lose to Georgia once in a while, but you can't lose to South Carolina. You can't lose to Kentucky. Those are games you can't lose to. And even worse, you can't lose to those schools on the recruiting trail. And that's what's happening right now. And Florida's a top 3 program right now. They need to recruit like they're doing, and they're not doing that right now.
I mean, Florida is one of the big 3. Florida State and Miami play each other this weekend. Talk about a little bit about Florida State and Miami. Florida State, obviously, trying to get back to their winning ways, and Miami seems to be playing better as of late.
Yeah, Miami's done a much better job as of late. I think about 3 weeks ago, we were looking at this Miami team and wondering if Manny Diaz was going to be out the door, but especially when they lose a guy like Derek King at quarterback. He was the guy that everyone thought would be kind of the catalyst to their season. Instead, you're looking at a young guy, in Tyler Van Dyke. He's really kind of emerged as become this star quarterback. And that's good news for Manny, because I think that's something they can build on and something he can use when he's trying to promote the fact that the program is right there. This is the program right now that could get to 8 wins by the end of the season. They can get to 9 wins if they win a bowl game. So that's not too far off. And you look at Florida State on the other side of that. Florida State has had so many struggles, and I don't want to pin it all on Mike Norvell. I mean, listen, like a lot of teams, they struggled with the COVID situation last year. And then he came in and he inherited a roster that was really kind of devoid of a lot of talent. And so he had to go to the transfer portal and get 13 kids that he felt like could add experience and talent that could help that out. And they've done that so far, but they've still struggled. I mean, look at this weekend. They lost their star quarterback, Jordan Travis, because they had an outbreak of flu on campus. It just seems like every time Mike Norvell and the Seminoles get one step forward, they steps back. So this is a big weekend for them, because if they lose this weekend, they can't be bowl eligible. And that would be like they haven't been bowl eligible since 2019. So if Mike Norvell wants to continue to take steps, they got to find a win some of these games.
Matt Michelle joining us here, Orlando Sentinel, national college football writer here on 3 and Out. Matt, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, guys. You take care.
Appreciate it. And again, wacky world of college football continues rolling along. Who knows what the heck will happen coming up this weekend. We've got more to come here on 3 and Out. As we know, the playoff committee will put the poll out for week number 2. How do they evaluate Alabama and Cincinnati after what happened this past week? We'll debate that next here on 3 and Out. Good to have you here on 3 and Out all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Getting ready for the second playoff poll to be released tomorrow night. And you look at how the committee evaluates and maybe how we should evaluate. BJ and Ben, when you talk about Alabama, I think a lot of folks were surprised, maybe not that Alabama was in. I've kind of been surprised. People we talked to is like, yeah, I had Alabama number 2. And I'm sitting there thinking, I mean, have they this last week a prime example of that where Alabama won, but it was without some injury. I mean, they did not play a great game. Gave LSU some chances to come back and win that football game. Cincinnati gave Tulsa some chances to beat them, came up with a goal line stop late in the fourth quarter to pull out a win after stopping Tulsa 4 times from the 3-yard line. And I think, BJ, how we evaluate those things is like, yep, see, Cincinnati's not good enough. Still won, by the way. And then you look at Alabama and say, they did not really play that well. Still won, but that's Alabama. They're good. And so I think right there you see kind of people's own inherent biases when it comes to this thing of how do you evaluate teams. And we've seen, Ben said this, Alabama gets the benefit of the doubt. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't remember when we put the playoff in place. We charged the committee with benefit of the doubt. Like we said, look, evaluate what you're seeing. Teams playing, winning, playing out their schedule. I get strength of schedule can be a component of it. But when you go out and win, winning should be a precedent in a lot of cases when you're looking at things. And I don't think that that's really the case. We're starting to see a lot of this stuff of, well, it's Alabama. No, there wasn't like, hey, playoff committee, we want you to judge this and all this. And, Section 7, paragraph B said, well, it is still Alabama. No, that's not criteria when you're looking at this thing.
Yeah, and look, there was a lot of criticism of Cincinnati, and probably understandably so, on Saturday, where if you're a top 5 team, and in the AP and coaches poll you are, I think you're number 2 in those polls. If you're a national championship contender and you struggle with a team that has a losing record, I think it's fair for there to be some criticism, right? Like, hey, Cincinnati, you were not great against Tulsa. You had a chance to put the game away. You fumbled inside the 5-yard line, and you had to basically have 2 separate defensive stands to win that game, but you did. And then you go to Alabama, and it's, Alabama found a way. And I think it's hard to be consistent when you evaluate teams, because if you're going to look at Cincinnati and say they struggled and they had to find a way to get it done on a day where they weren't at their best against maybe an average team, you have to say the same thing about Alabama. You can't just say, Alabama found a way because it's Alabama. You have to say, look, they didn't play well. Alabama was 1 pass completion away from losing. LSU had the ball at Alabama's 30-yard line at the end of the game, down 6. If you throw and we've seen crazier things in college football, if you throw a touchdown pass there, Alabama has 2 losses, and we're barely into November. So my thing is not that you can't criticize Cincinnati. But if we're going to criticize Cincinnati for a close win, we need to do the same thing when we look at Alabama having a close win. Now, do I think LSU is better than Tulsa? Yes, but it doesn't change the fact that Cincinnati had a scare, so did Alabama, and I think you have to evaluate both teams consistently when you're evaluating them through the perspective of being championship contenders.
BJ, I mean, this is our fault too, right? Because we act as if we ain't giving Alabama the same bias that the committee is, because we are. You just said we are supposed to. We are supposed to. We're supposed to do a lot of things. I mean, but this comes down to the fact that something Kevin said. Sometimes you just rank number 3. They don't see you as because somebody has to be. Right? Cincinnati, either they are a top 4 team or they're just a top 4 team until the final college football playoff rankings come out. Yes, Alabama should have lost to LSU, but they get benefited for losing. They'll say, well, Alabama just had one of their down games. You know why? Because most of America has seen Alabama play. Outside of the region of Cincinnati, Midwest, ain't nobody seen Cincinnati. And if you say Cincinnati, there ain't a person in America think you're talking about the Bearcats. They think you are talking about the Bengals. So the whole thing about it is this is a recency bias. But I thought it was supposed to be 2021. We are evaluating 2021. Cincinnati, everybody on their schedule, they have beaten. And Isn't it about winning the game, not how you won the game? But that's only for certain people too. So it's like somebody saying, hey, when we talking about college football playoff, we're talking about Alabama, talking about Georgia, talking about Oklahoma, talking about Oregon, talking about Ohio State. Or what about Cincinnati? Well, they're a real good story. But, BJ, until that final college football playoff ranking come out, you could put anybody in 3 or 4 or 5, but it becomes us more than anything else because, like you say, Kevin, if the preseason 2022 comes out, who's going to be 1 or 2? Alabama or Georgia. Sure. Period. That's based off no matter what.
And I'm kind of interested to see what this looks like tomorrow in terms of, not because I expect Cincinnati to be there, but when you just start looking at the poll, how do they treat Michigan State having lost to Purdue? Do they take a precipitous fall? Do they fall 1 or 2 spots? Because BJ, I think we know there are certain teams, if they lose, may only fall 1 spot, right? How do they treat some of these things that are taking place? Oregon had a nice win over Washington. It was close late, and Oregon scored late to make it look a little worse against a Washington team that I think has a losing record. I mean, do we look at that and say, well, Oregon wasn't really that impressive in that game? Or we say, look, Oregon went on the road and they won. I think that's what you're talking about. So I'm interested to see a couple of things. Obviously, how they treat the Bama and the Cincinnatis, because very similar, BJ. 1 close games, could have given it away late, didn't. Both teams won. How do you treat Michigan State? How far do they fall in this thing after losing to Purdue? Those to me are the intriguing things to kind of see how they treat teams independently. Like do we see Cincinnati go down to 7 despite winning? I mean, I don't know. I think those are, to me, going to be very intriguing to see how different teams, as Ben calls it, benefit of the doubt, but how different teams are treated in a loss, in a win. Michigan State's first loss, do they get a oops, or do they get obliterated out of the playoff poll down to, say, 8 or 9 after a loss?
Well, I think you go back to that word consistency, right? And if you're going to move Cincinnati down, if your argument is Cincinnati played an average team and barely got out of there with a win, and you're going to move them down, don't you have to do the same thing with Alabama? And that's why, like you, Kevin, Ben, I am interested in what we're going to see tomorrow, because though it will certainly change, the college football playoff polls are always fluid, and I think we've seen that the last few years. But if you're going to move Cincinnati down, don't you have to do the same thing for Alabama? Could we at least get a feel for the principles the committee are operating on tomorrow? I don't know. I'm very interested to see what we have.
They're not operating in principle. They're operating in bias. They know that when it comes to Alabama, BJ, no matter what decision they make, the rest of the world or their own look. Because the one thing we need to stop doing with college football, we need to stop saying it from where we sit. We around it. It's our job to know. No, we are talking about the average fan, a casual college football fan. Cincinnati, Alabama. It's going to be Alabama 10 out of 10, regardless. But you know what Cincinnati has done that we don't appreciate? Being undefeated. That is hard to do. They're undefeated. Oklahoma's undefeated. Georgia's undefeated. I don't know who else is undefeated at this point. Georgia is the only team. I mean, Georgia and Oklahoma are the only teams undefeated in P5, and I think Cincinnati is the only team undefeated in G5. Either we appreciate it or we don't. Now, Georgia, oh man, they're incredible. Oklahoma, they're doing it with a backup quarterback. Well, Cincinnati, they play Notre Dame. It shouldn't be like that, but BJ, if Cincinnati can break through this year and get in, you know why they scared to do that? Because now the UCFs, now they can get in. That's why they really not doing it. It ain't Cincinnati. Hey, dude, we can't open up the floodgates for the freaking G5 when we got P5 teams that can't even get in. So I think it's more or less, what we've done over the years, not necessarily Cincinnati. Cincinnati has first round talent at the quarterback position. They got a first round talent at the quarterback position, but yet they Cincinnati. So I don't know, BJ. That's why they got New Year's Six bowls. Because right now Cincinnati, that's what they're going to be staring down, even if they go undefeated.
Yeah. Again, we'll see what the committee does tomorrow. But I think if you're looking for some insight, how do those 3 teams kind of get viewed in the poll? Alabama, Cincinnati, and Michigan State. One with a loss, but from a power conference, they've had some big wins already here in in 2021 still have an opportunity for some big wins in the Big Ten still to come. How far do they slide after a loss, and how do those other two teams get treated here in the second poll? Very interested to see what happens there tomorrow night. We'll come back. Georgia and Tennessee, final SEC game of the year for Georgia in the regular season. 20.5-point favorites over that fast-paced Volunteers team. We'll break it down next here on 3 and Out. Good to have you here. 3 and out on this Monday. Tennessee and Georgia. Georgia's final SEC game of the regular season. So already got the SEC championship game appearance locked up, but 20.5-point favorite. And BJ and Ben, I'm looking at this Georgia team right now, and they've gone through the season. I think outside of Clemson, we knew they would be a favorite in pretty much every game they played. But you go back and start looking over the course of the season, and they've been almost a 3-touchdown favorite against everybody they've played in the SEC, no less. So against SEC opponents, they've been a 17, 18, 19, 20-point favorite in almost every game. 30-plus points last week against Mizzou. Tennessee, an upstart team, they like to play fast. They're up, averaging 38 points a game. They're just behind Georgia. Tennessee's 38.2, Georgia's 38.4 points a game. Is this a game Georgia should be worried about at all? Or is it just, hey, Tennessee can scare you, but as we've known, BJ and Ben, when you try to go fast and go fast and go fast, the worst thing for you is a 3 and out because you may only burn 30 seconds off the clock and give the ball up.
Oh, I think Georgia's the clear favorite, obviously the overwhelming favorite, but I do think there's the potential for a close game there, in part because Tennessee does present a different style of football, style of play than most teams you're going to face. And not only do they have an up-tempo attacking offense, they have a quarterback that right now is one of the best players in the country. Hendon Hooker for Tennessee has done a fantastic job this season. Remember, going back to the beginning of the year, transferred in from Virginia Tech, was one of a couple of guys vying for the starting job. Well, right now, Hendon Hooker is 4th nationally in passer rating. He's completing almost 70% of his passes. He has 21 passing touchdowns compared to 2 interceptions, has a really nice touch on his downfield passes, has been effective not only in the short to intermediate range, but also throwing the ball 20, 30-plus yards downfield. And if you're going to score against Georgia, good luck with that, by the way, you're going to have to have some big plays. The likelihood of any offense, Ben, whether it's Tennessee or even Alabama, going on a 12-play, 75-yard drive against Georgia is not likely. Now, can you catch them off guard if you're hurrying to the line of scrimmage? Can you, find a post pass for, 60 yards and a touchdown? Maybe. I mean, it's not likely, but I think it's more likely than you going on some 10, 12-play drive. So I think the big play ability for Tennessee is what gives them, I guess, a chance in this game. But the Vols have played pretty good since the start of October. Really, you go back to the loss against Florida, where Tennessee was just overwhelmed. They made some changes, and they've been pretty good since then. Since the Florida loss, Ben, you beat Missouri 62-24. You beat South Carolina 45-20. You played Ole Miss within 5 points. I know you ultimately got blown out by Alabama, but that was at least a competitive game early in the fourth quarter. And then you beat Kentucky 45-42. So I think this team has some confidence. I think they believe. Should be a great home atmosphere on Rocky Top. Beating Georgia, that it's going to take an A+ effort all the way around, everything you have. But I do think at least theoretically, Ben, Tennessee will present some challenges to the Bulldogs.
They will. I mean, give that Tennessee offense a lot of credit. Being able to go fast, Kevin and BJ, and play, and call a lot of plays, that doesn't bode well for any defense. The thing about Georgia that they don't get enough credit for defensively, they take away what you want to do well. As you mentioned, Kevin, 3 and out and only took 30 seconds. You put your defense right back out there on the field. They're going to have to practice patience. I know that don't go together. One to go fast and one to be patient really doesn't go together. But this is a Georgia defense that they put so much pressure on you with their front seven. And BJ, I know you said earlier that Georgia secondary is going to get tested. You got to get the ball off. It's not that you can't throw it. You got to get it off. And they put that secondary in one-on-one situations. These guys are back there fending for themselves. Problem is, they're going to get Hendon Hooker off his point. They're going to force him to make decisions quicker. They're going to force him to go to his second and third reads. And I'm not saying Hendon Hooker can't do that, but the art of quarterbacking is not something that is built in college. That's what you learn in the NFL. College, listen, they give you the scheme, they give you the defense. You go out there and run the play, you might get a check. The thing about Dan Lanning and something we heard from Brooks Austin earlier, they let them guys freelance. So those guys are out there saying, hey, listen, man, you see, if they run this, we're going to run it. I've never known a defense to have that much, freedom like Georgia's defense. But this is the thing I always learned the most this season. With everything we saying, it still doesn't matter. Georgia can be beat. I am not saying they're going to be beat. But if we have learned anything this season, you know why it was shocking that Florida got beat? It's who beat them and how they beat them. They got beat 40. So don't think this Georgia's defense this year, BJ and Kevin, it's like Atlanta Braves during the regular season. There's nothing to compare it to because they was win-loss, and they won the Super Bowl. World Series. Sorry, that's the foul because that's a lifetime away. But I just think that when you think about this Tennessee team, BJ, we've noticed that they've gotten better. College football has it because it's Tennessee. They've gotten better, yep, and they had to score 40-something points against Kentucky. Who cares? I just think this game is going to come down to, can Tennessee make it a four-quarter football game? Meaning, can they still be in it in the fourth quarter? I'm not saying they're going to be winning it, because if they do, that builds confidence. I say this again, and I know this is a total different team on total different. Georgia Tech lost to Clemson because they did not think they would be in the game in the fourth quarter. Think about that. A lot of heads, hey, man, we still in it. Yeah, that's Clemson. And so I think with Georgia, a lot of the time, the game is over when they run out on the BJ. ACC championship game now 20 years ago, Pitt versus Clemson. You walk out there and saw Clemson said, it's over. Look at the difference. Look at it's first play from scrimmage, Travis Etienne, 80-some yards, and never look back. If you are Tennessee, you got to say, look, this is our season. We can find a way to, because you're talking about disrupting everything. Ooh, Lord, I don't even know if that's breaking news. That's my good. If Tennessee, I'm not saying it's gonna happen. If Tennessee beats Georgia, cancel Christmas, Kevin. That means that the SEC championship game means that Georgia has to win it. But I just think that BJ and Kevin, sometimes you got a game in you that nobody expects you to go out there and get it done. I'm not saying that's gonna happen on Saturday, but I would not be surprised if it did happen.
Yeah, it might have been the one last week against Kentucky. But, I mean, look, I just look at this Georgia team, and I was talking in the break here with our producer Cam. It's like, look, Georgia has just been on another level from everybody in college football, BJ. I mean, it's really amazing. You look at Alabama. They've kind of been okay. They continue to win, but they've kind of been okay. They haven't had just that spark where they can go out and just lay it on somebody. Ohio State, kind of been the same way. They lost to Oregon. But you look at them last week against Nebraska, kind of a tough, hard-fought game, not the typical. You look at Nebraska, you look at Ohio State and say, man, this could be a 17, 21, 24-point ball game. It was closer than that. I think you look at Oklahoma. Oklahoma's undefeated, but they haven't been running roughshod over everybody the way they have in years past. The only team that you've really seen come out and just smack people around from start to finish every single week has been Georgia. And there's been nobody else in college football that's really looked like they're on that level. And as we talked to Brooks, I think Georgia's one of those teams, they have not had that letdown week, and I don't know that they're going to at this point. But Tennessee, obviously, as you said, could make a big statement for Josh Heupel here in year number one if they can do something that nobody thinks they're going to do. I just think to even a defense or offense that wants to run 80, 90 plays, BJ, do you believe that Tennessee is going to score more than 14 or 17 against this Georgia defense? Because nobody else has. Nobody else has all season long. I just don't see it.
And it would take a lot. I agree with you. We understand the importance of home field advantage. You understand the importance of matchups. But to your point, and this is really affirming when you talk about Georgia as being the number one team in the country, they've looked the part every week. I mean, since the opener against Clemson, and I still argue this. I think if Clemson opens the season against kind of an average team and not Georgia, I think they're a different team right now. I think Georgia, that performance that Georgia had defensively was so incredible, and I think it caused Clemson to kind of doubt some things, maybe moving forward a little bit, caused some hesitation. But you look at Georgia every week; they've looked the part. Since that week one game, which was a pairing of top five teams, Georgia's won every game by at least 24 points. Every game. Now, maybe that makes you a little uneasy if this is a 7-point game in the fourth quarter, but you have a lot of veterans on this roster. These guys have been in those games. I think Tennessee stylistically will present some challenges. Hendon Hooker has been a star this season, but let's also not overlook the offense that Georgia has. You know, Georgia's averaging close to 40 points per game. Stetson Bennett has been great. Hendon Hooker right now is fourth in the country in passer rating. Well, Stetson Bennett is third. The only quarterbacks who have been more proficient than Stetson Bennett this year are Grayson McCall at Coastal Carolina and Caleb Williams, who took over for a Rattler at Oklahoma. Stetson Bennett's been great. And you look at Tennessee defensively, their weakness this year has been pass defense. Tennessee is 13th in the SEC in pass defense. So don't be surprised if even early, Stetson Bennett is able to find some seams, convert some throws downfield, and continue to add to what has been just a really impressive resume. So look, big time atmosphere for the Vols. They're going to need it. I think the first couple of series will set the tone for the game. But in terms of matchups, Ben, how does a tempo-based team like Tennessee try to keep Georgia off balance? And is that something they can do with kind of design and play calling, or ultimately will it come down to one-on-ones? Guys just have to make plays.
I think that's what tempo is supposed to do. Tempo is supposed to make it so they keep you uncomfortable. The one thing Georgia defense does better than anybody, they keep offense off balance. They keep them uncomfortable. They don't let these teams, get into their rhythm. If Tennessee, the one thing a fast-paced offense gives you is confidence. Like if you are moving the ball consistently, you moving the ball down the field, you coming away with points. Because think about this with Georgia now. Don't think that Georgia don't know how good they are. They can talk about that. They don't look past nobody. No, you start moving the ball, them Georgia guys start looking around like, what the hell's going on? Because Tennessee has nothing to lose. And BJ, isn't it ironic that the guy who came there first, Hendon Hooker, they had 37 quarterbacks at freaking Tennessee, and he emerged as the guy, right? Sometimes I don't like to say this, but in the history of Tennessee, and obviously they've won that championship. They had Peyton Manning. This is one of the biggest games they're going to have because of what it means for the program, what it means to college football, how can it disrupt the college football playoff. Tennessee can find a way to make it a game. That doesn't mean they're going to win it. They're going to have to make sure they can take a punch, a play in and play out, because Georgia's going to keep coming.
Man, listen, it's only Monday, man. I mean, look, this is one of the biggest games in Tennessee history. They got a chance.
I'm not saying it is the biggest, BJ, but bigger than Tennessee. What it means because it's one thing to win it. It's what it means to college football. Because think about it. We think about years, think about storylines. If Tennessee can find a way to do this, you talk about the unthinkable. Man, I need anything to get people the hell away from Florida for 1 week and just from newsworthy. So Tennessee, come on, Sherbert Orange. Go out there and do it for college football.
Don't want to talk about Dan Mullen and his job security biz? Is that what?
No. Listen. Dan Mullen has two things on his side. One, he makes a lot of money. And two, if he got the lead, BJ, he's going to make even more money. Me and Kevin was looking at something the other day. Like, dude, look at how much money they're paying people to not coach with them. Some of these coaches, I think Charlie Strong, I think Lou Holtz still getting money from South Carolina. These dudes make money a long time, people.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think Auburn had the most dead money in the SEC, and they were paying paid over in the last 10 years, over $20 million to guys to not coach at Auburn. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. We've got more to come here on 3 and Out all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Good to have you here on this Monday. Normally we have Overreaction Monday, BJ and Ben. Tomorrow we'll have, I guess, Overreaction Tuesday night when the poll comes out, and we'll see what we're looking at. Again, we said a few minutes ago, I think everybody's going to watch what do you do with Alabama after a tough performance against LSU, Cincinnati, who obviously did not play well against Tulsa, and of course, how far does Michigan State drop after their loss to Purdue?
I mean, I'm ready to be surprised, disappointed. I mean, listen, you're talking about a process that has not made a whole lot of sense over the years, week to week. I mean, everybody can point to the TCU, Baylor, and it's hard to find consistency. And I do think Alabama is the ultimate X factor because they're the biggest name in college football. They're the modern powerhouse, but they have a loss to Texas A&M, and Saturday was not impressive. They were a play away from losing to a very average LSU team. So if Alabama stays at 2, and granted, there aren't very many teams who are seemingly, banging the door down to be that number 2 team in the standings, but I think if Alabama stays at 2, kind of makes you wonder what would it take for them to drop back to 3 or 4. But it's going to be interesting tomorrow night for sure.
BJ, this is big brands versus an upstart, right? When you talk about Cincinnati, they've been doing it the last couple of years. I mean, they did it against Georgia, came up short against Georgia in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, and they undefeated this team while adding Notre Dame to their schedule, and it's still not big enough. BJ, I'm not going to mention the brand, but if your favorite team went to a certain brand, would you wear them? That's Cincinnati, right? Are we willing to go against what we've grown up knowing? Alabama's what we grew up on. Cincinnati is what we got to get used to. Hey, man, there's a different taste to it, man, but it go down the same. But that's us. College football playoff, Kevin, they don't tell us how they vote. Just that they vote, and they get the hell out the way.
We'll see what we have to get all upset about when it comes back around on the show. Again, coming up later this week on Wednesday, Clay Helton going to join us. Really excited about having the new head football coach of the Georgia Southern Eagles join us. He will be on 3 and Out on Wednesday, fellas. So looking forward to chatting with him and getting his thoughts on the direction of the program. Eagles, of course, with just a couple of games left, 3 games left, and in 2 weeks, the highest ranked team ever to come to Paulson Stadium, BYU, will step in to Statesboro. So Clay Helton will join us coming up on Wednesday. A lot more to come here on 3 and Out. If you missed any portion of the show, ESPNCoastal.com. Conversation continues all the time on Twitter at Pigskin Radio.